When they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera gathered together his 900 iron chariots and all the men with him, from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" So Barak went down Mount Tabor, followed by 10,000 men. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword. And Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim. All the troops of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a man was left. This is the word of the Lord.
can't even put things together. But hey, dexterity is never been one of my strong points. That's okay though, right? It's the way God made me. I'm just glad my kids inherited my wife's coordination and not mine. But anyway, one of our military families gave it to me, and I call it my Molin Labe tie, because the term Molin Labe is one of the oldest military terms we know, and we know it was said at a specific place. It's probably the oldest phrase we know was said at a specific place outside of the Bible. Molin Labe can be translated as, you can take away my freedoms, my rights, my weapons, when you pry them in my cold, dead hands. Molin Labe. That's a translation of it. But anyway, so many, this is very sad, of course, is so many Christians are extremely good at fighting. And probably one of the most famous battles I know of was when 200 Brits at Rokes Drift took on 40,000 people who were better armed than they were at Rokes Drift, and they won. 200 versus 40,000. That's 200 to 1. And they won. Now, they were in a defensive position, and they were much better trained, but the other guys had better weapons. 200 to 1. What I'm saying is that so many of us have a very strong and accomplished military tradition. But I put on, in your bulletins, and I put in the overhead, this gentleman. They're making a movie out of him. It's coming out this fall. Have you seen this man before? Desmond Doss. He was the first man to win a Victoria Cross as a medic. And one of the things that made his job difficult was during World War II, the Japanese were out, he says, to get the medics. To them, the most hated men in our army were the medics and the BAR, which is a automatic rifle men. They would let anybody get by just to pick us off, that is the medics. They were taught to kill the medics for the reason it broke down the morale of the men, because if the medic was gone, they had no one to take care of them. All the medics were armed except me. He did not carry a knife, he did not carry a gun, he only carried his Bible. And the official army record said he saved 100 men under, when he was being shot. He only said it could be more than 50, but he was so badly shot up at the end of the battle that people weren't trusting his judgment anymore because he was in terrible shape. But they made a movie out of him. It's coming out. And in 1962, when they celebrated the 100th year of the Medal of Honor recipients, he was the one who was chosen to go as the official representative of all the living Medal of Honor men. He's very well respected. So what I'm trying to say with all this is that good Christians, people who read the Bible the same way we do, from all different denominations, some of them have become pacifists and say, the Bible teaches me that I should not bear arms against anybody. And that is in all strains of biblical Christianity. I also put in your bulletins there, Thomas William Bennett and Joseph Guy Lapointe. Those were Southern Baptists, and they received the Medal of Honor during the Vietnam War as medics. And many of you know our former district superintendent, Reverend Daniel Miller, was a medic in the Navy who took care of Marines. And he was under fire and received an award for he doesn't talk about it very much, but he was a decorated veteran for his service during Vietnam. What I'm saying is that while Judges is a very violent book, this is not to be taken against the argument for Christian pacifists. Christian pacifists have looked at the Bible the same way you and I do, and they've come up with a position that they should not bear arms. But what I'm saying is that so many of us have not taken that position and have served with distinction bearing arms. So Thomas William Bennett died February 11, 1969, and Joseph Guy Lapointe died June 2nd, 1969. They both received the Medal of Honor after death for their service. Now, Judges, as we talked about in Sunday school, is so violent that one of the first translators of the Bible to a foreign language, Euphilius, who translated it to the Goths, as in the Goths, Visigoths, the guys who conquered Rome, was so disgusted with how barbarous and military they were, he took out all the military passages out of the Bible. So he didn't. Their Bible never had it. He refused to encourage them in their violence. But Christians have served in the military very much, and Judges is a bloody book, as is Joshua. In the back of your bulletin, I put how many judges there were. Now, Judges contains over 6 cycles of, first of all, it starts off with sin. Then it starts off, because they sin, what happens? Suffering. And because they've sinned and suffer, finally they get around to asking God for help. We call it supplication. And the last part of the cycle happens 6 times, is salvation. They get a savior, a human judge, to rescue them. 6 cycles of this, over and over. And this is the Deborah cycle. Deborah and Barak. Let's pick it up at verse 14. Then Deborah. Now, who is Deborah? Well, she's called the wife of Lapidoth. Now, similar to our thing of husband, it's husband of something, okay? Sometimes that's a title. So this Lapidoth can either be a person's name or it's a sentence or a title, okay? So this can mean woman of flame. This is the original. Girl on fire from Hunger Games. This is the original. Woman of flame, or her husband's name is Flame. And you primarily see this in Jewish sources. They see Barak as the husband of Deborah, because they work so closely together, and Lapidoth being a title for her. Deborah means bee, but she's also described as the hot woman, the woman on fire, the torch woman, the original inspiration woman. Deborah. And then we talk about Barak. Barak is not seen very positively in Judges. He's seen as being dominated by Deborah. He will only go if she goes with him. What a wimp guy. But we need to understand how bad things were back then. It was a terrible situation. And the rest of the Bible, in 1 Samuel 12:11 and Hebrews 11:32, describe him as being a deliverer of Israel and a man of faith. But all of us need to remember, our faith is very weak. And Jesus commended a man who said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Because all of us do not have as much faith as we should. And all of us need to remember that with God, nothing is impossible. And with God, we can do things. Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Up. So not to fight, but get going. Now, who's this Sisera dude? Well, as the passage Vince read, talked about, he had 900 chariots, iron chariots. And back then, they were able to smelt copper and tin to make bronze. But one of the problems with copper and tin is A, there's not very much of it. B, it's weak. So at this time, we've actually dug up how they made iron back then. And they would do it a special way. They wouldn't be able to heat it because you have to be 2,800 degrees to heat iron to smelt it. So what they would do is just distill it. They would eliminate the impurities so you could smack it with a hammer. Very difficult process, but one of the advantages of iron is, as I said, it's more common and it's much stronger than bronze. So he had 900 chariots. That is a huge amount. You say huge? Oh, I'm sorry. Massive. And the Israelites had nothing. And things were getting worse. Judges 5:8 says, there was not a shield or spear of all Israel. Not a shield, not a spear. Okay, shield. Just a sec here. A shield can be a piece of wood, right? That's how bad things got. They didn't even have shields. Spears, well, for those of you who read Judges, you know that Shamgar, another judge, he's mentioned on the back of your bulletins there, he used an ox goad. And an ox goad looks like a spear, except it's designed for poking ox to get them to work better. So a sharpened ox goad would be very similar to a spear. They didn't have one single spear. They had to use ox goads. But these guys primarily were hunters, shepherds and hunters. So they used hunting weapons rather than military weapons. Once again, when you have a weapon such as a slingshot or bow and arrow used for hunting, it also has a military application. Up. For this is the day which the Lord has delivered Sisera. Now, Sisera was a really bad man. He had all these 900 chariots, but you'll notice in Judges 5:30, the text says, this is Sisera's mother saying this in a poetic form. This is Deborah's song about it. Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? To every man a girl or two. That's what you think it is. They would take all the women of Israel, especially the younger women, and divide them up as sex slaves. For Sisera, plunder of dyed garments, plunder of garments embroidered and dyed. 2 pieces of dyed embroidery for the neck of the looter. They were stealing everything. And Judges 5:6 says, the highways were deserted. The roads had broken down. The travelers walked along the byways. They would only go through paths. Village life ceased. There was no trading happening anymore. You might say, oh, they lost their malls. How bad is that? Can't do retail therapy. No, what it meant was you couldn't trade anymore. So if I have extra potatoes, I couldn't trade you folks for extra vegetables. You might say, potatoes, turnips, why would anyone trade for that? Well, it makes for a more complete diet. I may have a potato surplus, and you might have a cabbage surplus. Between the two of us, we might make a half-decent meal. But if you can't trade, things really start breaking down. Things were bad. They were destroying the economy of Israel. And why would they do that? Why don't you keep the sheep alive rather than killing them all, rather than destroying? Why don't you try and get as much money out of the country by slow greed rather than fast greed? Well, it's because they knew that it was only short term. They might as well loot what they can because they didn't know they'd be alive tomorrow. They were destroying the country. Sisera was wrecking Israel. Up, for this is the day which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not the Lord gone before you? Now, we know from the parallel passage that Barak was up in the mountain with 10,000 men, but he was trapped because Barak had come with his chariots surrounding him. Now, Sisera was surrounding Barak, excuse me. Sisera had trapped him on the mountain. Now, what happened in verse 15 is the Lord routed Sisera. They saw God work, and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword. God did it. Now, how did this happen? Well, once again, the parallel passage says, look, this is the opposite of God parting the waves. This time he's bringing rain. Now, chariots back then would only work well on flat country. Still the same problem, right? For some reason, people didn't ride horses back then. We think it's because they didn't have the stirrup. That's one reason. Secondly, the horses were smaller. So they never rode them. They just used them to pull things. God did this. God sent a supernatural rain. Remember, Sisera had these 900 chariots, and he got flooded out. Why did he get flooded out? Well, because A, they need to be in the flat land, but B, they would only use them during the dry season. God sent a supernatural rainstorm. This was a time when the chariots were stuck that God did this. The Lord routed, and we see this in the parallel passages, by sending rain. Big flood. They were trapped. Now, who was the God in charge of the rain back then? They thought it was Baal, right? They thought Baal was the storm god, that he's the one in charge of the rain, and therefore, since they're following Baal and they have the iron weapons, they should win. This is an example of what happens when you have poor morale. They all collapse. Why? Baal is working against us. There may have been hail, and I don't know, the biggest hail I've heard of was almost 2 pounds. It's about 8 inches. Any of you ever seen hail 8 inches? 6? You guys have seen hail? You know, can you imagine being hit with that, baby? Texas, yes. Everything's bigger in Texas, yes. What's that? I would not want to be hit with those babies. I don't know what the softballs, yeah, crazy. And they come down fairly quickly, right? Yeah. So it can do serious damage. So there may have been hail involved with this, but remember, they thought this is that Baal was in charge of the storm directly. Okay? Very, very disheartening. They're being flooded. The chariots are stuck. They have the hail. Other things happening and they say, God routed Sisera with the edge of the sword. And so Sisera ran away from his prize iron chariot. He fled on foot. The Lord shows he's in control. So Israel came down from the heights, descended. Up in the heights, they had protection from the chariots because chariots cannot go uphill. They were safe up there, but they were in danger of being starved. And the horses and chariots were completely dismantled. Barak completed the defeat. He was called as a military leader, and he did his job here. He chased them, the chariots and the army, the ones who were stuck, back to Harosheth Hagoyim, which was the base of Sisera. And nobody was left with the army anymore. They were all destroyed. God had told them to destroy, and they did. Are we ready to follow through when God works? When God is working, are we ready to do what he says? Are we waiting for God's deliverance? Are we taking steps to get ready? This is a great miracle. And you might say, well, why did God let this go on for so long? Well, it was because of their sin. When Matt and Sarah were here, I was talking to them about the statistical evidence for what happens when a person becomes a believer. The math is, the statisticians say, just by going to church, one becomes 15% richer. And they got very upset and said, excuse me, doesn't that sound more like a health and wealth gospel? And of course, having my brother and his wife, my brother went to, before he became an attorney, went to seminary, and his wife was the one of the seminary registrars. That's where they met. And so having a discussion with them, my wife, so all 6 opinions was quite a vigorous one, as you can imagine, with all kinds of citations and things. But still the point is, and many of you, that's your testimony, that okay, I don't understand how the water turned into wine, but you can come to my house and see how God turned beer into furniture, right? God does that, and that is something that people's testimony is. That when we start living for Jesus, we start focusing more on how we can help our family and not just feed our lusts and our greeds, right? We start blessing our family. It makes for a huge difference, and that is well established. But sin also destroys. We have AA meeting here 3 times a week, and I chit-chat with the guys before and after as they set up and take down. Takes time for them to set up the coffee, so I chit-chat with them. They tell me horrible stories of how alcohol ruined their friends, their lives, before they stopped drinking. Sin hurts. And sin, the point of the book of Judges is sin destroys. Sin causes enormous devastation. And we ask God to deliver us from sin, but we still want to keep sinning. We don't want the effects of sin. We want all the benefits of sin without the penalty, right? Well, friends, benefits of sin are short-term. The consequences are long-term. Are we ready to follow through in God's works? Are we ready to call on Him for deliverance? Ready to receive God's deliverance? Folks, so many of us are in bondage to sin. And of course, you ask anyone who's still drinking what they need. Here's another drink. No matter if it's too hot, they need another drink. When it's too cold, they need another drink, right? No matter what happens, they don't need AC, they need another drink, right? They don't need heat, they need another drink. No matter what happens, they need another drink. And we say that's a form of bondage, but they don't seem to get it. It's so sad, right? When we're in bondage, we don't realize what it's doing to us. But sin is also a form of bondage. Have you and I admitted that we're in bondage to sin, that it's putting us in big trouble? We are slaves to sin. Slaves. We're not in control of ourselves. Are we ready to receive God's deliverance? And say, hey, Jesus is the one who can help us. He has helped other people. His word says He will. Have we asked Him? Are we asking Jesus for help? Are we choosing to follow Him, understanding that He is the way, the truth, and the life? Today's Communion Sunday, when we celebrate the fact that we have a Savior who died for us, behold the Lamb. I'm going to ask Mr. Benson, Pastor Happy, to help me with communion, please.
Let us stand, or you can stay seated if you want as we sing these first three verses here. Behold the Lamb.